Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Butterfly Spirit 314. And today guys, what I want to do is I want to give you my top 4 things I learned about gardening. And these are going to be for people who are interested in creating their own garden, or either let's say you just started a garden and you're struggling, you don't know what could be wrong. So I'm going to give you my top 4s when it comes to gardening that I learned from a gardening event that I attended. The event was concerned with starting a garden and being able to successfully grow vegetables and herbs. Okay, so without further ado, here we go. So the first top reason I have, and my top 4s, they're all important. One is not more important than the other. Okay, all right. So the first thing that I learned, my first top thing that I learned about gardening, is I learned when it comes to gardening, it's very important to take in consideration the site where you're going to have your garden. The reason why is because depending on where you decide to put your garden, okay, and I mean the place where you want to have like the plots for your garden, okay, or let's say you're going to use some other type of garden setup, okay, depending on where you want the site of your garden to be, you need to take into consideration different factors. So the factors you need to take into consideration are if that site is going to have a lot of water, that could be too much for your garden. You want to take in consideration if there is going to be too much wind exposure. You want to take in consideration if there's going to be a lot of sun exposure, which will be heat exposure. And you also want to be concerned about the fact of if there is going to be disturbances from different types of plants like trees, bushes, and other types of things such as animals like rabbits, squirrels, birds, and other wildlife that can be in your area. Okay, so that's my top 1 reason, or my top 1 that I learned about gardening. Okay, my top 2 that I learned about gardening is that when it comes to gardening, your neighbors can have an impact on the success of your garden. Okay, so you may not have anybody living next door to you. Maybe, the house next door to you is vacant. Okay, and right now there's nobody there, so you decide you're going to set up a garden. Okay, when people move in next door to you, regardless of which side, whether it's on the right of you, the left of you, behind you, okay, or maybe if the house is in front of you and your house is behind, okay, no matter where your neighbors are located around you, your neighbor can have, or your neighbors can have, an impact on the success of your garden. So if your neighbors, let's say you don't have any neighbors around you, okay, and then later you find that you have a neighbor that's living next to you, okay, the neighbor that is going to live next to you can have an impact on you if, let's say, they start putting in trees that are next to your fence. Those trees are going to have roots that can dig down and start to, spread out. And those roots from the trees could touch your garden. Same thing goes for any type of bushes as well. Okay? Or let's say your neighbors decide to start a garden, and this may not be current neighbors, but these could be future neighbors that you have. Decide to start a garden. And let's say they put in some very invasive plants, and those plants are the type where they're going to, spread. Like, let's say you got your bamboo, or let's say they decide to put ivy into a garden, or let's say they decide to put ivy on their house, and that ivy is going to grow all around their house, and then it could try to grow into your yard. Okay, so your neighbors and what they do can have an impact on your garden, whether your neighbors are to the right of you, to the left of you, in front of you, or behind you. Okay, so it's very important to understand that. Okay, you want to make sure that wherever you put your garden, wherever the site for your garden is going to be, you want to make sure the site for that garden is not going to be able to be bothered by what your neighbors decide to do. Okay, so that's my top two, my top second thing that you should know about your garden. Okay. All right, guys. So my top third thing when it comes to gardening and you're trying to grow vegetables and herbs is that what you want to do is you want to take into consideration the amount of space that you have for your garden. Okay. So if you have a really small yard, all right, and let's say you want to have a garden in the back of the place that you happen to be, let's say, in the back of the house that you happen to be renting or buying or whatever. You have to take into consideration the amount of space that you have and what you want to grow. Okay, some plants are going to need more space than others. Some spaces for gardens are going to need a more unique setup. It's not going to just be able to be expansive. Okay, so you have to consider how much space that you have when it comes to setting up your garden. This is something you have to consider up front before you even start, putting down soil or anything. You have to consider your space because that can also be a factor that's going to determine the success of your garden. Okay, so consider your space. Okay, so that's I believe it's my top third thing. Okay. My top fourth thing, and I'm gonna have a bonus tip as well. So my top fourth thing when it comes to gardening and having success with planting vegetables and herbs is that when you are deciding on, the setup of your garden, you need to consider who you are going to be gardening for. You need to consider if you're going to be having plants that are going to be feeding just you solely, or if it's going to be to feed your, let's say, you and your partner. Let's say you, your partner, and your children. Let's say it's going to consider you, growing for the entire neighborhood that you live in, or growing for, a gardening club, for, whoever you're going to be gardening for. Even if you're gardening for, let's say you're a teacher and you're gardening for children that happen to be in your classroom. Okay, or let's say you're gardening for people that live in a senior community. Whoever you're gardening for, you have to take into consideration before you set up your garden. Okay, because based off of the amount of people who you're going to be growing for, you have to factor that into the setup so you can be successfully able to produce the amount of vegetables and herbs and anything else that you want to be growing, even fruits. Okay, so that is the top four that you want to take into consideration when it comes to starting up your garden. Okay, my top fifth thing that you want to consider if you're going to be setting up a garden to grow herbs and vegetables is you want to make sure that you take into consideration who's going to be helping out with the gardening. So is it just going to be you and, you as an adult? If you're going to be doing the gardening, you're going to set up your garden a lot different than if, let's say, you're just doing a garden for your kids. Okay, so the height of the garden is going to be different. If your kids are going to be helping you with gardening, you're going to have your plots down lower so the kids are going to be able to, they can stretch their hands out and plant the plants and stuff like that and have them evenly spaced and stuff. So you want to do that. Okay, if it's just going to be you, your adult size, let's say you're like 5 feet, or let's say you're 5 or 6 feet or whatever you're going to be doing the gardening. Whoever you're going to be having help you with the garden, you want to take in consideration the height of those people and their level of reach, because that needs to be important when you're setting up a garden, because you don't want to set up your garden and not take this in consideration, and then it'd be hard for you to reach the plants, or it'd be hard for you to be able to bend. You have to take into consideration also your physical ability. Do you happen to have any type of physical ailments that are going to prevent you from being able to bend down, that are going to prevent you from being able to reach up high? Okay, you have to take those things in consideration when it comes to a garden, because maybe you may be somebody who maybe you have to grow things inside your house. Maybe you might be somebody who can grow stuff outside. Maybe you're going to need to have somebody to help you. It all really depends, on who you're going to have helping you. And then another bonus tip I have for you, that is what goes with my top fours. By now it's probably top sixes. But anyway, another top thing that I would suggest when it comes to gardening and you'll want to be successful with vegetables and herbs is that you also want to make sure that you have an access to your garden. So when you're planning out your garden, right, we talked about considering your space, the amount of space you have for your garden. Okay, we talked about making sure that you consider the height and the physical ability of the people who are going to be helping you, whether it's going to be just you yourself as an adult, or if it's going to be maybe your grandchildren helping you. Okay, it's important to make sure when you deal with the setup of your garden, you want to make sure you consider that you have an access to the garden. So when I say access, you want to make sure you're going to be able to get to those plants, right? You're going to have, let's say you're going to have space where you can walk. You're going to have space where you can bring a wheelbarrow. You want to make sure you have the space to bring like a lawnmower through, okay, or any other type of equipment that maybe you may have to use in order to let's say like you have to cut your grass. So let's say, you need like access for a rake or wheelbarrow or whatever. You need an access so you're not continuously running the risk of stepping on your plants. Okay, so you have to factor that in. Okay. Now, I know if you're somebody who's, let's say you're renting the place that you're at, you probably are not going to want to invest in putting down concrete, for a concrete sidewalk. You're probably not going to do that. But there's other unique ways you can set up an access, so you can be able to walk alongside your plants, and walk between the rows. So you want to make sure you can do that and make sure it's wide enough. Consider, the amount of, consider, how tall you are. Consider, if you have, how much space you have between your feet when you're walking, are you going to need more space, because you're going to have more than one person helping you. Okay, these are things that you want to definitely consider. If you want to think about spacing, if you go to like a local orchard or farm that's in your area and you see them growing, you may get some ideas maybe of the space that's needed between the rows, so that like the farmers or gardeners are not stepping on the plants. So you may get some kind of idea. Okay, and I would say watch YouTube videos, watch different videos on social media to get some kind of idea, read some gardening books as well, so you can find out how to set up your access when it comes to being able to walk alongside your garden, or being able to, bring equipment like a lawnmower, weed eater, wheelbarrow, different other things, right? And you can bring them, you can make sure you're not stepping on your plants, or making sure that equipment is not coming into contact with your plants. So as you guys can understand, there is a lot of things that go into gardening. There are so many things about gardening that I had no idea it was a science to gardening. I mean, it's an art and it's a science. I mean, I think it could be really fun to do gardening. I think there's just a lot of considerations, and there's more things about gardening that I learned that I didn't even include in this video. But these are some things that I think are kind of the foundational things that you guys need to know about gardening. And I am studying to be an herbalist. So as an herbalist, I am wanting to touch gardening, because there is a chance that in the future I probably am going to be going ahead and growing my own herbs. And with all the tips I talked about, I'm going to be taking in consideration, whether I can grow these particular herbs indoors. Can I grow them outdoors? What kind of space do I have, right? What type of environment am I going to be trying to set the garden up in? Who's going to be helping me? Is this going to be me? Is it going to be me and a partner? Is it going to be, me and a family member, or me and some kids that are helping out from the neighborhood? Who's going to be helping me? What is our physical level of ability? Can we stand? Can we bend down? Can we reach up? What are those things that we can do in the garden setup process to make sure our garden is successful. Because there's a lot of people who start gardens. There's so many people who start gardens and stuff, and they don't take these things in consideration. They go to their local hardware store where they can find gardening equipment, or garden center, wherever they go, and they get everything set up, and they don't take into consideration the foundational things when it comes to their garden. And then when their garden doesn't do well, they wonder, why isn't my garden successful? So I suggest, if you guys are going to be getting into gardening, very important to make sure you join some beginner gardening classes to make sure that you take into consideration the foundational things first. Yes, there's more advanced things you may want to learn, but you want to get the foundation down first before you start trying to do really complicated and advanced things when it comes to gardening. Okay, so this has been my top 4 video, plus some bonus tips of some of the things I learned from the gardening event that I attended yesterday, which was concerned with growing vegetables and herbs in your garden. Best of luck, guys. Thank you for watching. Bye.